So welcome back, everyone, to the final session of the day, which is our student session. And today we have the privilege of three of the four participants in the field school are going to present some of their academic work. The sessions are a little shorter, so we'll have to be conscious of that. They're 30 minutes each. But we're very excited to have Helena Cutbill here with us. Helena has graduated. She's from London, England, and she's graduated from Trinity College, Dublin. We got to know each other at McGill, where I was privileged to teach her a course in religious studies last year. Helena studies mostly religion and society and secularization and this kind of thing. I've forgotten the title of her paper, but she's going to share it with us. So, and we've had a great time in the last few days out on the Hill with Helena. So this is a great opportunity to hear from the other side. So Helena, over to you.
Great, thank you for the introduction, Sean, and thank you to Spain for hosting us and to Valerie for the church. And yeah, thanks everyone for being here. And it's great to get together and have a conversation. So I'm going to move away from the romantic philosophy stuff. This is like the paper that I'm going to present. I also don't remember what the title was. Something about habitation, redeeming habitation. It's a truncated chapter from my undergraduate dissertation that I finished in May. So, habitation is fundamental. We all must dwell. As creatures of tools and technology, we humans shape our dwellings to suit our purposes and meet our needs. And as such, all dwelling phrases cultural and ideological truths for the community which has produced it. It might seem superfluous to say, but home's more than a shelter. A shelter and the place and community which enmeshes it acquires the quality of home when it has become a site of belonging. What we might call an embeddedness, an entanglement in both the material and immaterial realities of a location within which one is free to be themselves. Because of this, home is one's initial map of meaning for the entire world. This is especially embraced by us, the social human creature, with our endless capacity for storytelling and our deep joy in gathering around a familiar hearth and sharing a meal. The meaningful relationships we garner through stories and sharing are made both with our fellow people and with non-human elements of our world. And thus, home doesn't operate as a solid boundaried thing, but it is cooperatively created in time and place. Today, innumerable people are in the throes of home and housing insecurity, struggling to carve out meaningful dwelling amidst the dynamics of the real estate market and fighting for habitation that is more than just a shelter. In this presentation, I'm going to emphasize the importance of dwelling as a practice rather than as a purchasable good. I hope to examine the too often neglected cornerstones of healthy habitational practice that have been eroded in the last half millennia and move towards a vision of the future which can reincorporate dwelling practice that is community-oriented, ecologically minded, and ultimately resilient to top-down administration that would extract self-reliance from embedded communities. Though deeply complex, we can trace the problem to the trope that we've spoken about today of the psychological severing of a reciprocal relationship with the land in favor of an instrumental possessive relationship, what some might call disenchantment. The idea that the land we live on and through is an arbitrary resource has laid an imaginary Cartesian grid across the universe and turned place into space. Meaning and home are the intangible ideas we humans may bring to space if we have the money to buy the right to do so. Articulated simply by Willie Jennings, home has become for us something to be first owned and then loved. Dwelling. A practice of compromise, cultivation, and communication, not only with other human elements, but with all the constituent parts of our environment, each with certain needs and each providing particular opportunities for cohabitation. These elements can be made familiar through physical and emotional involvement in one's dwelling, and in so doing, we can begin to bolster ourselves, communities, and places against the cold economic structures that might destroy them. Self-determination, self-identification and self-reliance, even in small ways, thus revealed through dwelling, while the world itself opens up as a place of belonging and a home worth committing to. Indeed, it is no easy task, since we are, for the most part, obliged to live in the design and vision of those who profit from the subjugation of the land and seek to instrumentalize that which dwells on it. Monolithic housing units, grid-planned streets, monocrop farmland, towering skyscrapers, concrete overpasses, all these hallmarks of the modern built environment map a web of industry, development, and financial domination. And so in this economy of winners and losers, huge numbers fall through the gaps and are forced to live in geographies of exclusion that essentially punish people for not having the capital to purchase the right to belong. Alienation from one's home environment, whether from forcible removal, to the rural poor trickling towards the city in search of work, to folk watching their surrounding land being destroyed by pollution, to those who simply struggle to map meaning onto the rows and rows of indistinguishable suburban houses, this results in profound spiritual confusion and malaise. As the incubator for belonging, culture, meaning, and community, dwelling and dwelling practice must be addressed if we are to begin redeeming habitation for everybody. Through embracing reciprocal relationships with the environment through which we live, garnering particular bonds with our homes through labor and familiarity, and communally creating our homes, we can begin to address this alienation. Let us imagine a home, which is not a boundaried thing with an inside and an outside, but a system in which we are entangled. Embedding oneself as a member of an ecological community, being of rather than on the land, confuses a paradigm of ownership that insists on hard lines and borders rather embraces the porous borders of dwelling. Indeed, hard boundaries of home are a myth, as every house mouse, woodlouse, and cobweb patiently proves. Alternative visions of home and habitation have been systematically eroded in favor of the discrete and propertied vision of home that lends itself to the real estate market. Looking towards these alternatives can illuminate roots out of these geographies of exclusion and moreover shed light on the successes of certain urban communities. Vernacular dwellings or low architectural formations are characterized as housing built by those same people who will dwell in them, largely or entirely from the material found in the immediate environment. Indeed, vernacular architecture has been the way the majority of human people have created their habitation for millennia. The recent professionalization of construction and so on is more efficient for large urban populations, but it has deprived the majority the opportunity to participate in the material realization of their home. This simple act of picking up a tool and grasping its many possible functions is not a given for many people today. Though building one's own home today may be seen as an eccentricity and DIY a sportive hobby, the reality is that such participatory laboring profoundly adheres dwellers to their home, encouraging those deep private commitments which are so sorely lacking in neglected urban neighborhoods. In a vernacular dwelling, the mindful labor which has constructed it demands an understanding of the needs and limitations of one's environment and cohabitants. For instance, which trees are suitable for carpenting and at what age, what can be eaten, what animals we share our places with, and how our dwelling impacts them. This practice not only incubates a sense of belonging, but produces knowledge that, when passed down, reinforces the entire cultural identity of the community. Though the groups which produce such dwelling may feel that the housing is theirs, it is a belonging too which can't be purchased, since it's necessarily mutual between person and place, developed by highly particular, laborious, and ultimately rewarding processes which has the dwellers belonging to their homes just as much as their homes belong to them. Examples of vernacular can be found globally, from the 19th century log houses here in Newfoundland, to igloos further north, to caves, watermills, tents, sod houses, all across the world. In general, these dwellings are highly functional and suited to their purpose, as well as harmonizing beautifully with their environment due to the use of local material. In the architectural canon, vernacular is contrasted with conventional building projects as non-architecture or mere building, defined in its total submission to function with no concession for style or monument. High modern architecture and the urban built environment of today have been noted for centuries for their oppositionality to and mastery over the so-called wild or non-human world. The ethic of the mainstream practice is to express humans as somehow set apart from nature, remarkably outside or above the system through which we're given life. Vernacular, on the other hand, recognizes, indeed makes material, our basic being of it, the land dwelling in us as much as we dwell in it. This quietly self-validating mode of habitation is actually threatening to the status quo. It's been flagged by James Scott, among others, that the self-directive vernacular represents a threat to the modern state because of its de facto resistance to large-scale administration and top-down government. Standardization, regularity, and predictability are factors relied upon by states to control and exploit their populations. It's the same reason why censi were first introduced by colonial powers to subjugated nations. The census in Ireland was the first of its kind, and it was decades before the UK had one for their own nation. Geographically vast nations would experience variation as wide as the countries themselves if vernacular were the norm. And this was less problematic when the main concern of a state was the protection of the monarch's wealth and estate. But since industrial globalization, governments have been far more concerned with the cultivation of national rather than local identities. Thus, housing today is built according to the desires of a central organizing principle rather than the decisions and customs of those who will actually live there. Without the imperative to participate in the production of our homes, we have also lost touch with the flora and fauna indigenous to our dwellings. Either it's fetishized, maligned, or ignored altogether. I'm embarrassed to admit that it was only recently that I discovered the London plane tree, which I grew up around, isn't native to Western Europe at all. For centuries, humans knew the name and nature of almost every element in their habitats. It was all meaningful, all significant, all of the community. If something was unfamiliar, it was accompanied by a healthy amount of caution and curiosity, and perhaps was cause for contemplation. The loss of such knowledge contributes to our general feelings of disconnection and placelessness. With less and less anchoring us, we could be anywhere in the world, while pigeons, weeds, weather patterns, even undesirable people are just an inconvenience to the smooth operation of our urban lives. I've always thought it was a telling testament to the hubris and anthro-exceptionalism of the modern West that Edmund Hillary was the first recorded person to reach the summit of Everest. Tenzing and the Sherpas who assisted Hillary were completely necessary for the survival of their visitor, but these people had never gone to Everest Peak before. The impulse to climb as high as possible, the libido dominandi, or the desire to dominate, which St. Augustine believed characterized the earthly city, this didn't itch them. The mountain was part of their home. They knew its peak as a supremely perilous and undesirable place to go, and they knew it very well. When European settlers reached North America in the middle of the last millennia, they were bewildered and scandalized to find people who spilled themselves out into the land. These people constituted their cultural identities through place and creature so that their human bodies themselves seemed almost to be part of the landscape. For many North American indigenous groups, just as in many other places in the world, identity was something that literally took place. Europeans neither understood nor tolerated the indigenous habitational practice largely, and its sensitivity to living history, social custom, and deep respect for place and creature with which the humans dwell. It is well documented that many Europeans believed colonized peoples were somehow less than human, as if humanity necessitated setting oneself apart from the rest of creation. To the affront of the settlers, the indigenous groups challenged the developing modern idea that a human person was a fleshy fortress housing a consciousness, rather than a porous spiritual being immersed in an effective community made up of many others of a similar description, human and otherwise, like we saw with the poetry earlier. This is a similar view of the human creature as was held in medieval Catholic cosmology, wherein individuals and groups were susceptible to other than human spirits residing in the world. Through the development of modern philosophy and what some might call disenchantment, this perspective was replaced by the vision of a human as a boundaried organism piloted by a chemical consciousness. To believe otherwise was naive and heretical. The impetus to shut down any self-directive power in the land is articulated by today's built environment and its ethic of abstraction, often totally waiving regard for the land's own wisdom. And of course, again, any attempt to conquer the land is predictably and demonstrably ineffective, as every cockroach, mildew, our present wildfires are showing us time and time again. An Indigenous vision of habitation, which finds identity through land and place as living historical ancestral elements of the community, appreciates the relative roles of the human and more than human in the bizarre yet fundamental task of establishing dwelling in a world that is strange. The immense social collapse that occurred for so many Indigenous groups in the past several centuries can always be understood by a severed relationship with land. When settlers removed people from their homes, they were destroying their ability to situate themselves meaningfully in their world, the plants, lands, animals, and spatial practice through which they had thought was confiscated from them, when from here, as if to reinforce the legitimacy of their worldview, new owners of North America pushed people into sharply boundaried houses without regard for particular social organizations. These new surroundings phrase nothing intelligible about their way of life. Many rehomed Indigenous groups suffered some of the most severe social disintegration in modern American history. Working decolonially must indeed be an integral part of redeeming habitation. We must reckon honestly with the violent realities that have brought us all to where we are. What we may find from looking at this sad history of habitational practice is the importance of embedding community and self-direction. We find reasons why so many are suffering from spiritual malaises and a seeming inability to empathetically connect with the world around them. Home cannot operate as a successful map of meaning if it's arbitrary, stripped back, and incommunicable. It's the responsibility of the community to initiate new members into traditions of meaning, but our ability to do so is buckling with every luxury apartment, every skyscraper, every inch of jungle leveled. These alternative views of habitation, with their emphasis on embeddedness and entanglement, are not merely a rose-tinted vision of the past, and indeed we cannot go back, as we've been emphasizing today. Jane Jacobs famously revealed in her book, which is now 60 years old, urban life flourishes under the same conditions. Particularity fosters particular personal commitments. Density of inhabitants forges relationships, which is made visible as life spills out onto the communal area of the street, which is street life is minimized as kind of a preventative measure for this. And a population which stays put produces particular and idiosyncratic social customs, which importantly galvanize the entire process. It is true today, as it was in Jacob's time, that urban communities are rarely given the chance to develop themselves in this way, because urban cleanup campaigns, developers will grab the chance to do away with disadvantaged areas or like less profitable infrastructure to build hotels, luxury apartments, skyscrapers, etc. And lots of people living in inner cities are cleared away to increasing distances from the city centre. Self-improvement is often then synonymous with getting out of a disadvantaged area, and urban improvement resembles wealthier residents moving into an area which is on the up rather than a stationary community making gains from within and for each other. Today, urban habitation seems about as far from these past visions as we could get. Our food is packaged in clear plastic and silently imported as if by magic. The buildings we use daily are built by strangers out of alien and unfamiliar materials. The hundreds of people we see each day are simply to be ignored, no matter how distressed or in need they may seem. We're constantly ensured that the highest goods can be purchased, and our identities ought to be outsourced to commodities. Many of us are constantly reminded that our home is not really ours, monthly paying for the privilege to live within a space that belongs to somebody else. More and more each day cannot afford even this. But in these desperate conditions, urban dwellers can and must contribute constructively to their home community and bolster private relationships with their dwellings that might begin to transcend the domains of ownership and dispossession. Participatory and meaningful labor is one way to do this, be that home improvements like the unslumming slums, Jacob's examples in her book. Community gardens are another example. Projects underway in my home city of London are introducing allotments into the centre of communities in green spaces that would otherwise be flat and unproductive are becoming productive and participatory locations for communities to meet and make food and beautiful vegetation, etc. These habitational practices among others, are fundamentally about attending to the material and personal structures of one's dwelling place, finding one's identity, one's own and one's community identity here rather than in commodity, and creating essentially a home worth committing to for non-transactional, non-financial reasons. The truth is that beyond the spiritual nourishment of groups and individuals, the stakes of healthy habitational practice extend to the ecological community of the entire world at large. The more we're pushed inward, the less empathy may sprout naturally for others, humans and non-humans alike. Urban community building encourages ecological practice since it fosters not only an understanding of, but an investment in our environment. Unlike an Edenic vision of a pleasure garden, these habitational practices require hard work, commitment, compromise, and a willingness to learn. Putting this work in not only foments a love of our world, but a respect for ourselves as parts of it. Indeed, how else are we to understand the present climate catastrophe, but as an expression of hatred for our own earthly bodies? If we find ourselves in a position to do so, we must foster practical, meaningful, communal engagement with our homes and communities. We must begin to redeem habitation. We must possess ourselves over and against being possessed, and through that find what precious little space we have for self-determination. We must love and know our homes, since they will never fail to constitute us, no matter how much we wish to believe we can transcend space and whatever is found in it. In my home city of London, the spirit of once shared green spaces persists, if only in name, in places like Clapham Common and Wandsworth Common. But the deficit its dwellers feel is tangible and worsening each day with rising rent and the disassembly of public services. But there are meaningful works being done in the name of community building. I would highlight the work done by the Resolve Collective, a grassroots architectural design collective that asks for forgiveness, not permission, if they ask for forgiveness at all. They claim urban spaces and use them for events, art, gardening, discussions, eating together, living, generating ideas. Just recently, they had their Rebel Space project in Brixton, where they built a kind of like community structure that was used over a few weeks until it was cleared away. They call it guerrilla urban planning. There's many other examples of this. Ample Space is in Cork City. It's a collective land trust that helps people grow their own food and place to live. In other European cities, organizations like The Shift fundraisers from the community to support for legal battles and living costs and so on. There are many examples of these kinds of projects happening in cities. What is notable and brilliant about these groups is that they treat the urban communities as the stakeholders of urban design and environmental policy, and in so doing strengthen the abilities of these communities to live and thrive under present conditions. Fundamentally, urban design absolutely can be directed to emphasize ecological community right here, right now. Connecting with nature cannot be a pleasure retreat for the professional managerial class, but must begin with what is immediately around us. This is our reality, this is our home. So to conclude, what we must take from vernacular and indigenous visions is the practical utility of self-determination in dwelling as a resistance to forces of abstraction, consumerism, and alienation. We must begin to understand freedom not as being untethered from anything material, but a liberative and reciprocal relationship with one's environment, generated through compromise and personal commitment, even if it's challenging. Things like using tools and growing one's own food and just consciously opting into one's community will begin to re-establish habitation as to resist top-down administration. Home is a labor of love, continually created and mutually informed by the community, human, animal, vegetable, material, all dwelling through each other and creating a dwelling which is more than the sum of its parts. Thank you.
No, a huge rush. I think we should take questions.
Sure.
After each presentation.
Thanks so much. That was wonderful. I'm going to ask you just a simple but provocative question. During your talk, I was thinking a lot about the urban-rural divide.
Yeah.
Do you think that we need to get people out of cities, encourage people to live rurally? Is
Um,
there a normative, like, part of the problem here is that too many people live and want to live in cities, and we need to give all the incentives we can, and post-COVID is an opportunity, right? More people work from
Yeah.
home, to just get people the hell out of the cities.
I think broadly, yes. In like in a nutshell, yes, but maybe not with specific regard to the issue that I'm talking about in this paper. But I think like in like a vision of a world where things are working better and we're treating the land with more respect, probably yes. But I also think that like if we begin to practice home as something that's like more participatory and embedded, people will just like naturally feel more adhered to places that maybe don't have as many like shops and commercial opportunities but have particular significance to them, and moreover not feel so desperate to find work. And if you're in some rural town and there's absolutely no money and you move to the city, if people are more committed to their homes and producing things for each other and within the community, then again that drift towards the city will hopefully in theory alleviate. So I think that you're right that, or I would agree that I think that people do need to leave the city, but I think that that would potentially be part of the result of practicing these processes. But it's really interesting, and I also am really conscious that I want to emphasize that cities aren't going away, and we need to think about living in the city and urban ecology, because we can't just get rid of cities and send everybody away, because people do live there and the majority of people live there, and we need to find a way to make urban life viably ecological, basically. So kind of two answers to that.
Helene, I really appreciated your sharing today. I think that dwelling as a practice, I felt empowered by what you were saying. And I'm particularly concerned about senior citizens and their how almost discriminated against and all kind of channeled towards institutions that are certainly so opposite to dwelling as a practice. There's so little sensitivity paid to their needs that it's appalling. So the inspiration that I felt from what you've said today is just profound. The whole idea of establishing dwelling, like, wow. So I just feel that you really struck on some very, just you've reframed some things so beautifully that that I can't help but feel that you have a tremendous foundation from which to grow. And I know of situations that would parallel what you're doing, and certainly commend you for that. So thank you for that.
Thank you for your kind comments. Thank you.
When I think of home, there's kind of this like connection for me with family. And you talked a lot about community, and so I guess I'm just inviting an opportunity for you to speak on this notion of family, and I don't necessarily mean blood relative, but it can include that as well. But yeah, just what connections do you see between home and family?
Yeah, I think that family is a really important aspect of it. That being said, like I would say that I picked the word community rather than family intentionally, because I think that even though the kind of like blood generational relationships are like often and like often the most and really operatively powerful, they aren't for everybody the relationships that you build your home in and around. And for whatever reason that differs from person to person, you can't really, or it's not really productive to generalize about why that might be. But I think that we should have space for people to establish communities that don't necessarily like include their blood relatives. I think you're completely right yeah, I think that family is like a massive part of it. And I would hope that that comes under what I'm talking about when I say community.
I guess I'm thinking of family in terms of like a quality that you could ascribe to a community.
Right, yeah. Well, I would agree with that. Yeah, I think that that would be definitely appropriate. Yeah.
Is a huge part of the problem renteership because it's hard to care for things that you rent as opposed to things you own, whether it's collectively owned or personally owned or.
I just got really angry recently. Just moved back to London from Dublin, and I've been like cycling around, and I keep seeing all of these identical bikes. I'm like, wow, like these bikes are really popular. They've started this new bloody thing where you pay £20 a month, and instead of buying a bike, you rent a bike. It's just a normal bike. Why is that a thing? Just buy a bike. Do you know what I mean? Yeah, I think that rental culture is like absolutely destructive to any kind of like care or personal commitment to anything. And it's unavoidable. We're like pushed into it because it is more profitable. But I feel very strongly about that. Sorry, somebody had a question.
Yeah, I really enjoyed your talk, and I was really reminded of Indigenous ways of being within when you talked about dwelling and being in community as opposed to family. I did not knocking family, but I think a lot of times within families as opposed to community, there's a deeper sense of ownership. So from an Indigenous way of thinking, if you don't own the land, then you can't own people. And, family becomes more open. Everybody within the community has a sense of responsibility towards the growth of everything within the community, whether that's children or land, food, all of those kinds of things. So I think you're onto something very interesting, and I agree. There needs to be that kind of idea of how do you do that within a city, because
Yeah.
you're right, they're not going away.
Yeah.
It just until we find a way around end stage capitalism, because there's no way of actually surviving.
Yeah.
It's run on money. So I really appreciated that. What's next? Like you're thinking from that point of view, where does that then lead to?
Yeah, so for me, I would say that I am quite concerned with urban ecology, especially since like I am from a city, so it makes most sense for me to kind of like champion this cause in my home, right? So a few of the initiatives that I mentioned, they're relatively new. These are all quite green, at least the ones that I've come across. I think that it'll be exciting to see what happens. And most of these organizations are pretty small. The Ample Space one is kind of getting bigger and has like different responsibilities. That's in the south of Ireland. I think that it'll be interesting to see how if they can like grow and evolve, or if they kind of fundamentally need to be these like smaller guerrilla organizations. I think for me personally, where I would like to see this go is keep encouraging these kinds of like community organizations to occur and just see what happens, see where people want to take it, the challenges that will be run into and so on, and just hope that increasingly people find the time and spirit to commit themselves to their home and maybe be inspired or whatever and bring it to their community. Yeah, that's what I would like to see in the future.
Nicole has a question, and then I see Uwe has his hand up. Hello, Uwe.
Hello.
So, and then we'll move on to the next.
So some contemporary philosophers now think about the importance of the environment for constituting a people or a community. And on that view, place is something that can't really be substituted, because if you substitute the place of a people, then those people aren't a people anymore. So you make this distinction between place and space, and it seems that, space is something that's substitutable, right?
Yeah.
As long as a community can be put anywhere, they'll be fine. But I'm just curious, are you okay with that view, or do you have a view of sort of place as particular to the environment, and therefore
Yeah.
you know, maybe what would be helpful is that, you know, the destruction of the environment is also the destruction of the community.
Yeah.
I don't know if that makes sense. But.
It does make sense. I think that I've understood what you're asking. It's a really interesting question. I think that I think that to answer the first part, like I probably would agree that space being arbitrary is destructive to communities, and that kind of like we can move people around, and as long as they have a shelter, they'll be fine. It's like, I mean, that's like demonstrably untrue historically. But that being said, like I do think that place can be like fermented through these practices. So even if you are like thrust into a new space, you can make it into like a more like meaningful and like holistic place. For instance, like many like immigrant groups in cities have done like unbelievably well in doing that, and completely like have very, very personal commitments to those places, and they've made them like incredible, whatever. But the second part of it, like the question of like living in someone else's design, especially somebody with an agenda, that was kind of what I explored in the wider dissertation, that question as well. I didn't really have an answer. It's very difficult to see how, like, what possibilities there are for that when a group is like made to live through the eyes of another, if you know what I mean. And so like the space is organized in such a way to express certain things, and then how does a group that maybe doesn't have those things as part of their binding philosophy, like how do they then have like a healthy dwelling in that place? I don't really know, but it does happen a lot, and it has happened a lot. And I think that, like, for instance, the Resolve Collective, like I think it was just like an empty lot in Brixton, and they made it this like incredible community space for a few weeks. Like that is an example of, you know, how people can begin to reimagine their relationships to other people's design, and resist space as being arbitrary. Because also like the idea that space is arbitrary, it's like fundamentally a lie as well. It's like ideology, maybe, I think. Yeah, so I don't know if that answered your question or...
Uwe.
Yeah, hello to everybody. I'm so glad that I can participate online. At least I would have loved to be with you, but we are just here in Ansbach at my mother-in-law's house and struggling so that she can stay here in spite of an intensive care situation. And therefore, I found your paper also very touching. And as a gentleman in the beginning also said something in that direction, that the problems you are addressing seem to be quite intergenerational. What came to mind in the German language when we talk about Heim, which means home, nowadays we primarily mean intensive foster care places for or spaces for the elderly, which are just deposited there and often are deprived of the right to mobility and so on. And on the other hand, my daughter says she wouldn't even be able to rent such a place where we are now living in. So seems to be this two abysses of the elder generation and the younger generation. And so I wonder, and maybe it's just more comment, how we can create a kind of intergenerational solidarity in certain places so that people do not get displaced in such manners any longer.
Yeah, I think intergenerational relationships are like incredibly important as binding agents for communities, just on the principle of like diversity fosters strength. And as I spoke about briefly in the beginning, like stories and histories are like incredibly powerful forces when it comes to making like homes and communities. Yeah, I think it's such a disaster and a shame the way that generations feel so alienated from one another. I think it's great that we're all here today, people of different ages. I think that's a really wonderful thing. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I think that we need to work on those relationships, strengthen them, value them, family and otherwise. Yeah, talk to each other.
Thank you, Helena.
Thank you so much.